The blood on Rebecca Keller's apron had long since dried to a rust-brown stain, and she stared at it in the dim lamplight of her cabin as though seeing it for the first time. Though 3 weeks had passed since they buried Thomas in the rocky Colorado soil. She was 24 years old and felt ancient, her hands trembling as she tried to unknot the ties at her waist, but her fingers would not cooperate, would not do this simple thing, and she sank down onto the floor with her back against the rough-hewn wall and let the tears come again, hot and bitter and endless. The winter of 1878 had come early to Platteville, a small settlement clinging to existence in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, and the wind howled through the gaps in the cabin walls like a living thing seeking entrance. Rebecca pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and thought about Thomas, about the way he had smiled at her on their wedding day just 2 years prior, about the plans they had made for the ranch they would build, the children they would raise, the life they would create together in this harsh and beautiful land. All of it gone now, swept away in an instant when his horse had spooked and thrown him against the rocks near the creek bed. She had held him as he died, had felt his blood warm and wet on her hands, had watched the light fade from his eyes as he tried to speak her name one final time. The doctor had given her laudanum for the pain, but she had thrown it away, unable to bear the thought of the numbness it would bring. She wanted to feel everything, every sharp edge of her grief, every jagged cut of her loss, because to feel nothing would be to dishonor Thomas's memory, to pretend that his death meant nothing, that their love had been nothing. So she sat on the cold floor and wept until her throat was raw and her eyes burned. And when the tears finally stopped, she felt hollow, scraped clean, emptied of everything but the aching certainty that she would never love again, that her heart had been buried alongside Thomas in that frozen ground. The knock at the door came just before dawn, a solid, patient sound that pulled Rebecca from an uneasy doze. She had not meant to sleep, had been sitting at the table with her head in her arms, and now she rose stiffly, her body protesting the awkward position. She opened the door a crack and found herself looking up at a man she had never seen before. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard the color of dark honey and eyes that were an unexpected shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains. He wore buckskin clothing and heavy furs, and there was something about him that spoke of long silences and wild places, of a life lived far from the comfort of towns and settlements. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep and rough, as though he did not use it often. "Name's Aaron Whitmore. I heard in town that you might need help with your stock before the worst of the winter sets in." Rebecca blinked at him, confused and still half asleep. "I did not ask for help." "No, madam, you did not. But Samuel at the general store mentioned your situation, said you were alone out here, and I thought I might offer my services. I do not ask for pay, just meals and a place to sleep in the barn while the work gets done." She wanted to refuse, wanted to send him away and close the door and return to her private grief, but something in his steady gaze stopped her. There was no pity there, no uncomfortable sympathy, just a straightforward acknowledgement of reality. She did need help. The cattle needed to be moved to lower pasture before the heavy snows came. The barn needed repairs. There were a dozen tasks that Thomas would have handled, and that she could not manage alone. She had been trying to ignore it all, to pretend that she could simply exist in this cabin until she faded away entirely, but the animals did not care about her grief. They needed food and water and shelter, and she could not provide those things without assistance. "The barn is not in good condition," she said finally. "The roof leaks." "I can fix that," Aaron said. "If you have spare lumber and tar paper, I can fix it." Rebecca stepped back and opened the door wider. "There is coffee on the stove. It is old, but it is hot." He nodded and removed his hat as he entered, ducking his head to clear the low doorframe. He was even larger inside the small cabin, his presence filling the space in a way that made Rebecca suddenly aware of how long she had been alone, of how the silence had become a weight pressing down on her. She poured him coffee in a tin cup and set it on the table, then retreated to the far side of the room, uncertain how to be around another person, how to make conversation or observe the normal courtesies of hospitality. Aaron drank the coffee in silence, his eyes moving around the cabin, taking in the details. Rebecca wondered what he saw, whether he noticed the unwashed dishes stacked by the basin, the dust gathering on the shelves, the way she had let everything slide into disarray. When he finished, he set the cup down carefully and stood. "I will start with the barn," he said. "Get that roof patched before the next storm comes through. Then I will take a look at your herd, see what needs doing there." "Why are you helping me?" Rebecca asked, the question emerging before she could stop it. "You do not know me. I cannot pay you." Aaron was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving to the window where the first pale light of dawn was beginning to show. "I have been alone in these mountains for 5 years," he said finally. "Trapping, hunting, living in a cabin so small you could not turn around in it. A man gets to thinking, up there in all that silence. Gets to wondering if maybe he has forgotten how to be around people, how to do a decent thing for someone who needs it. I am not looking for payment, madam. I am looking to remember how to be human." Something in his words resonated in Rebecca's chest, a recognition of the isolation she had been feeling, the sense of being cut off from the world and everyone in it. She nodded slowly, unable to trust her voice, and Aaron took that as acceptance. He put his hat back on and left the cabin, and through the window she watched him walk toward the barn, his movements unhurried and economical, a man accustomed to hard work and long days. Over the next week, Aaron worked from dawn until well past dark, and Rebecca found herself drawn to the window again and again, watching him repair the barn roof, mend the fences, move the cattle to better grazing. He worked with a quiet competence that was mesmerizing, never wasting motion, never rushing, simply doing what needed to be done with a steady determination. She made him meals and left them on the porch, unable to face sitting across a table from him, unable to make small talk or pretend that everything was normal. He never complained, never asked for anything more, just ate what she provided and returned to his work. On the 8th day, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it snow and wind that turned the world white and howling. Rebecca had not seen Aaron since the previous evening, and as the storm intensified, she began to worry that he might be in trouble, might be trapped somewhere without adequate shelter. She pulled on her heavy coat and boots and struggled out to the barn, the wind tearing at her clothes and stealing her breath. Inside, she found Aaron sitting on a pile of hay, wrapped in his furs, calm and unbothered by the storm raging outside. "You should come to the house," she called over the wind. "It is not safe out here." Aaron looked at her for a long moment, then stood and gathered his things. They ran back to the cabin together, fighting against the wind, and when they burst through the door, they were both covered in snow and gasping for air. Rebecca shook off her coat and moved to the stove, building up the fire while Aaron stood dripping on the floor, looking uncertain. "You can sleep by the fire," Rebecca said, not looking at him. "I will get you blankets." She brought him everything she could spare, and he arranged them on the floor near the hearth, a makeshift bed that looked surprisingly comfortable. They sat in silence as the storm raged outside, the wind screaming and the cabin creaking under the assault. Rebecca made coffee, and they drank it without speaking, the silence between them strangely companionable, as though words would have been an intrusion on something fragile and new. "Tell me about him," Aaron said suddenly, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Your husband." Rebecca felt her throat tighten, the familiar surge of grief rising up to choke her. "I cannot," she whispered. "It hurts too much." Aaron nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I had a wife once," he said, "and a daughter. They died of cholera 6 years ago back in Kansas. I could not save them. I could not do anything but watch them suffer and die, and when it was over, I left. I came out here thinking maybe I could outrun the pain, that if I went far enough and stayed alone long enough, it would stop hurting. But it does not work that way. The pain follows you. It is always there, waiting." Rebecca stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. The lines around his eyes, the way he carried himself with a careful restraint, the reason he had spent 5 years alone in the mountains. "How do you bear it?" she asked. "I do not know that I do," Aaron said honestly. "I just keep waking up each morning and doing the next thing that needs doing. That is all I know how to do." "I cannot love again," Rebecca said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I cannot go through this pain again. It is too much. It would destroy me." Aaron leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "Then let me hurt with you," he said quietly. "You do not have to love again. You do not have to be anything you are not ready to be, but you do not have to be alone in your pain. I know what it is to lose everything. I know what it is to think you will never be whole again. Maybe we cannot fix each other, but maybe we can just exist together. Two broken people trying to survive the winter." Rebecca felt something crack open inside her chest, a fissure in the wall she had built around her heart. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she did not try to stop them, did not try to hide them. Aaron did not move to comfort her, did not offer platitudes or false reassurances. He simply sat with her in her grief, his presence solid and steady, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. The storm lasted 3 days, and during that time, Rebecca and Aaron existed in a strange suspended reality, cut off from the world by walls of snow and wind. They talked in fits and starts, sharing pieces of their pasts, their losses, their fears. Rebecca told him about Thomas, about the way he had made her laugh, about the ranch they had planned to build, about the unbearable emptiness his death had left behind. Aaron told her about Mary and little Sarah, about the helplessness he had felt watching them die, about the guilt that had driven him into the mountains. On the 3rd night, as the storm finally began to ease, Rebecca found herself sitting beside Aaron on his makeshift bed near the fire, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. She was exhausted, wrung out from crying and talking and feeling too much all at once, and without thinking, she let her head rest against his shoulder. Aaron stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, his arm coming up slowly to wrap around her shoulders, holding her gently as though she might break. "I am afraid," Rebecca whispered into the darkness. "Of what?" Aaron asked. "Of feeling anything again. Of letting you in and then losing you too. I cannot survive that pain again. I know I cannot." Aaron was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I am afraid too," he admitted. "Every day I am here, every time I look at you, I am terrified. But I have spent 5 years running from fear, and it has not made me any safer. It has just made me alone. Maybe that is worse." Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the solid reality of another human being beside her. "What do we do?" she asked. "We take it one day at a time," Aaron said. "We do not make promises we cannot keep. We do not pretend we are not broken. We just wake up each morning and see if we can face another day together." It was not a declaration of love, not a grand romantic gesture, but something about it felt more honest than any flowery words could have been. Rebecca nodded against his shoulder, and they sat together in the firelight until exhaustion finally pulled them both into sleep. When Rebecca woke, gray dawn light was filtering through the window and Aaron was gone. For a moment, panic seized her, the fear that he had left, that the previous night had been too much, that she had driven him away. But then she heard sounds from outside, the rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting wood, and she relaxed. She rose and made breakfast, more food than she had bothered to cook in weeks. And when Aaron came in with his arms full of firewood, she had it waiting on the table. They ate together, a simple meal of eggs and salt pork and biscuits, and though they did not speak much, there was a new ease between them, a tentative understanding. After breakfast, Aaron went back to his work, and Rebecca found herself moving through the cabin, cleaning and organizing, doing the tasks she had neglected for weeks. It felt good to be useful again, to have a purpose beyond simply surviving from one moment to the next. As the days passed and December arrived, a routine developed between them. Aaron worked on the ranch during the day, tackling the endless list of repairs and improvements that a working cattle operation required. Rebecca cooked and cleaned and tended to the household tasks, and in the evenings, they sat together by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing in comfortable silence. Aaron had moved his bedroll to the far corner of the cabin, giving them both space and propriety, though Rebecca found she missed the warmth of his presence beside her. One evening in mid-December, as snow fell gently outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Aaron pulled out a small knife and a piece of wood and began to carve. Rebecca watched his hands move with practiced skill, the way he coaxed shape and form from the raw material, and she found herself mesmerized by the process. After an hour, he held up a small horse, perfectly proportioned and detailed, and offered it to her. "It is beautiful," Rebecca said, taking it carefully. "Did you make things like this for your daughter?" Aaron nodded, his expression distant. "Sarah loved horses. I must have carved her a dozen of them. She would line them up on the windowsill and make up stories about them, grand adventures with heroes and villains and happy endings." He paused, his hands stilling. "I have not carved anything since she died. I could not bring myself to do it. But tonight, watching you across the room, I just felt like I needed to make something, to create instead of just survive." Rebecca turned the horse over in her hands, feeling the smoothness of the wood, the care that had gone into every cut and curve. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will treasure it." As Christmas approached, Rebecca realized that she did not want to face the holiday alone, and more than that, she did not want Aaron to face it alone either. They went together into Platteville, a journey of several hours on horseback through the snow-covered landscape, and bought supplies and a few small luxuries. The townspeople stared at them with poorly concealed curiosity, and Rebecca knew there would be talk, that people would speculate about the mountain man staying at the widow's ranch. She found that she did not care as much as she would have expected. On Christmas Eve, they decorated the cabin with pine boughs that Aaron cut from the nearby forest, and Rebecca made a special meal with the fresh supplies they had purchased. They sat together at the table, the candlelight soft and warm, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Rebecca felt something that might have been contentment, or at least the possibility of it. After dinner, Aaron gave her a gift, a pair of mittens he had made from soft rabbit fur, and she gave him a shirt she had sewn from fabric she had been saving for a special occasion. "I did not know I would have anyone to give gifts to this year," Rebecca said, suddenly shy. "Neither did I," Aaron replied, his gray-blue eyes warm, "but I am grateful that I do." They sat by the fire late into the night, and when Rebecca finally rose to go to her bed, Aaron caught her hand. She looked down at him, her heart suddenly racing, and he stood slowly, his large frame unfolding until he was looking down at her, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low. "These past weeks with you, they have meant more to me than I can properly express. You have reminded me that there is still goodness in this world, still reasons to keep going. I do not want to rush you or pressure you into anything you are not ready for, but I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. It is not just gratitude or loneliness or convenience. It is something deeper, something I thought I would never feel again." Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes, emotion swelling in her chest. "I am so afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid of dishonoring Thomas's memory. I am afraid of letting you in only to lose you. I am afraid of everything." Aaron raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her cheek. "I am afraid too," he said. "But I have learned that fear is just part of being alive, part of caring about something beyond your own survival. Your husband would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone. He would want you to be happy, to find joy again, even if it is with someone else. And I promise you, Rebecca, I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret letting me into your heart." Rebecca searched his eyes, looking for any hint of deception or uncertainty, but found only sincerity and a depth of feeling that took her breath away. Slowly, tentatively, she reached up and placed her hand over his, pressing it more firmly against her cheek. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to love again without betraying everything I had before." "You are not betraying anything," Aaron said firmly. "Love is not a finite resource. What you felt for Thomas, what you still feel for him, that does not diminish or disappear just because you let someone else in. The human heart is big enough to hold more than one love, more than one grief. You can honor his memory and still build a future. Those things are not mutually exclusive." Rebecca closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her, feeling the truth in them even as part of her still resisted. When she opened her eyes again, Aaron was still watching her with that patient, steady gaze that had become so familiar, and she made a decision. Rising on her toes, she pressed a soft, brief kiss to his lips, then stepped back before her courage could fail. "Stay," she said simply. "Not in the corner, stay with me." Aaron's breath caught, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then he nodded, and they moved together to her bed, lying down side by side in the darkness. Aaron wrapped his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and for the first time in months she felt safe. They did not do anything more than hold each other, but it was enough, more than enough, a promise of healing and hope and the possibility of something new. The winter deepened and January arrived with brutal cold and heavy snowfalls that sometimes kept them confined to the cabin for days at a time. Rebecca found that she did not mind, that the forced intimacy had become comfortable, even precious. She and Aaron developed their own rhythms and rituals, small moments of domesticity that felt profound in their simplicity. He would read to her in the evenings from the few books she owned, his deep voice turning familiar stories into something new and magical. She would mend his clothes and cook his favorite meals, taking pleasure in caring for someone again, in being needed. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing their dreams and fears, their past disappointments and future hopes. Aaron told her about his childhood in Ohio, about learning to hunt and trap from his father, about the restless urge that had driven him west in search of something he could never quite name. Rebecca told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about meeting Thomas at a church social, and falling in love with his earnest enthusiasm and grand plans, about the journey to Colorado, and the hard work of building a life from nothing. One night in late January, as they lay together in the darkness, Aaron's arms wrapped around her, Rebecca finally spoke the words that had been building inside her for weeks. "I love you," she whispered into the quiet. "I did not think I could feel this way again, did not think I would ever want to, but I do. I love you, Aaron Whitmore, and it terrifies me and fills me with joy in equal measure." She felt Aaron's arms tighten around her, felt the shudder that ran through his body. "I love you too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have loved you since that first morning when you opened your door and looked at me like you could see straight through to my soul. I have loved you through every moment of doubt and fear and grief. And I will love you for whatever time we have left in this world." They made love for the first time that night, a slow and tender joining that was as much about comfort and connection as it was about passion. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Rebecca cried. But this time the tears were not only grief but also release, a letting go of the guilt and fear that had been holding her captive. Aaron held her through it all, murmuring soft reassurances, his hands gentle on her skin, and when the tears finally stopped, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in months, as though some enormous burden had been lifted from her shoulders. February brought a false spring, a stretch of warmer weather that melted much of the snow and turned the ranch into a muddy mess. Aaron used the opportunity to assess the herd more thoroughly, and what he found was not encouraging. Several of the cattle had not survived the winter, and others were in poor condition, weakened by the cold and lack of adequate food. They needed to buy more hay and supplement feed, which meant money that Rebecca did not have. "I have some savings," Aaron said when they discussed the situation over dinner. "Money from my years of trapping. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to buy what we need and get us through until spring." Rebecca shook her head immediately. "I cannot take your money. This is my ranch, my responsibility." "It is our ranch," Aaron said firmly. "Or at least, I hope it will be. Rebecca, I am not going anywhere. I want to build a life here with you to make this place into something strong and successful. That means investing in it, putting in the work and the resources necessary to make it thrive. Please, let me do this. Let me be a partner in this, not just a hired hand." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with her pride and her practical sense. Finally, she nodded. "On one condition," she said. "We make this official. I will not have you pouring your money and labor into something that is not legally yours as well. We should marry, make this a true partnership." Aaron's face broke into a smile, the first truly unguarded expression of joy she had seen from him. "Are you proposing to me, Rebecca Keller?" "I suppose I am," Rebecca said, feeling her own lips curve into an answering smile. "What do you say, Aaron Whitmore? Will you marry a grieving widow with a failing ranch and more baggage than a train car?" "In a heartbeat," Aaron said, standing and pulling her up into his arms. "In a heartbeat, every day for the rest of my life." They were married in early March in the small church in Platteville, with only Samuel from the general store and his wife Martha as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like Rebecca's first wedding, but somehow it felt more real, more meaningful. She wore a simple blue dress and Aaron wore his best shirt and trousers, both of them scrubbed clean and nervous as children. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Aaron kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache, and she knew without doubt that she had made the right choice, that Thomas would have approved, would have wanted her to find happiness again. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Aaron lifted her down from her horse and carried her across the threshold, a traditional gesture that made Rebecca laugh with surprised delight. They spent their wedding night making love slowly and thoroughly, learning each other's bodies with new freedom and intimacy. And when Rebecca fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt a peace she had not known since before Thomas died. Spring came in full force in April, transforming the harsh landscape into something softer and more welcoming. The grass turned green and wildflowers bloomed in riotous color, and the cattle that had survived the winter began to recover and thrive. Aaron worked tirelessly on improvements to the ranch, building new fences, expanding the barn, creating better systems for water and feed. Rebecca worked alongside him when she could, and they fell into an easy partnership, each understanding their role and responsibilities without need for discussion. In May, Rebecca realized that her monthly courses had not come, and after a few weeks of uncertainty, she knew. She was pregnant, carrying Aaron's child, and the realization filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy and fear, excitement and grief, all tangled together in a way that made her dizzy. She waited until dinner to tell Aaron, her hands shaking as she set his plate in front of him. "I have something to tell you," she said, sitting down across from him. "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." Aaron's fork clattered to his plate, his eyes going wide. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I am certain." Aaron stood and came around the table, pulling her up into his arms and burying his face in her hair. She felt wetness on her neck and realized he was crying, his shoulders shaking with the force of his emotion. "I thought I would never have this again," he said, his voice broken. "I thought that part of my life was over, that I would never be a father again. Rebecca, you have given me more than I ever thought possible." Rebecca held him tightly, her own tears falling freely. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Afraid something will go wrong, afraid I will not be a good mother, afraid of everything that could happen." "We will face it together," Aaron said, pulling back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Whatever comes, good or bad, we will face it together. You are not alone, Rebecca. You will never be alone again." The pregnancy progressed through the summer, and Rebecca bloomed with it, her body growing round and healthy under Aaron's devoted care. He hovered over her constantly, worrying about every little thing, until she had to gently but firmly tell him to give her space to breathe. They prepared the cabin for the baby, Aaron building a beautiful cradle from pine wood and Rebecca sewing tiny clothes and blankets. The whole ranch seemed to pulse with anticipation, as though the land itself was holding its breath waiting for this new life. In September, as the leaves began to turn gold and red, Rebecca went into labor. It was long and difficult, 20 hours of pain that left her exhausted and afraid. But Aaron never left her side, holding her hand and offering encouragement. And when the baby finally came, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and powerful lungs, Rebecca wept with relief and joy. They named him Thomas Aaron, honoring both the husband she had lost and the husband she had found. And as she held him against her breast for the first time, Rebecca felt a completion she had not known was possible. Aaron was transformed by fatherhood, his usual reserve melting away in the face of his son's needs. He would spend hours holding Thomas, rocking him and singing old songs in his deep voice, his expression soft with wonder. Rebecca would watch them together and feel her heart expand, amazed that she had been given this second chance, this opportunity to love and be loved so fully. The autumn passed in a blur of sleepless nights and new parent exhaustion, but also profound joy. The ranch continued to thrive under Aaron's management, and by the time winter arrived again, they had expanded their herd and made significant improvements to the property. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On a cold December evening, as they celebrated Thomas's first Christmas and the anniversary of the first Christmas they had spent together. Rebecca stood at the window watching snow fall gently over the ranch. Aaron came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how much has changed in a year," Rebecca said. "About how I thought my life was over, that I would never feel anything but pain again. And now look at us. We have a son, we have a thriving ranch, we have a future." "You still hurt?" Aaron asked quietly. "When you think about Thomas, sometimes," Rebecca admitted. "But it is different now. It is not the sharp, cutting pain it used to be. It is more like an old ache, something that flares up occasionally but does not consume me. I will always love him, always carry him in my heart. But I love you too, Aaron, and our son, and the life we are building. I have learned that the human heart is bigger than I ever imagined, that it can hold multiple truths at once." Aaron pressed a kiss to her temple. "You saved me," he said. "When I came here a year ago, I was barely alive, just going through the motions. You reminded me what it means to truly live, to hope, to love. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Rebecca Whitmore." Rebecca turned in his arms, looking up into his face, this beloved face that had become as familiar as her own. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "That is what people who love each other do. They hold each other up through the hard times and celebrate together through the good times. You taught me that it is possible to love again after loss, that opening my heart did not mean betraying my past. You whispered that you would hurt with me, and you kept that promise, but you also showed me how to find joy again." They kissed, a slow and tender meeting of lips that spoke of commitment and partnership and enduring love. Behind them, baby Thomas made a small sound in his sleep, and they both turned to look at him, this perfect child who represented their future and their hope. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were difficult winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease and wolves, financial struggles and setbacks. In 1881, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Mary Sarah, honoring Aaron's lost wife and child, and 2 years after that, another son they called James. The cabin had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Aaron built on 2 additional rooms with the same careful craftsmanship he brought to everything he did. The ranch grew and prospered under their joint management. Aaron's knowledge of the land and animals combined with Rebecca's head for business made them a formidable team, and by 1885, they were one of the most successful operations in the area. They employed several ranch hands and had expanded their herd significantly, and while the work was never easy, they faced it together, partners in every sense of the word. Rebecca never forgot Thomas, never stopped visiting his grave when the weather allowed, bringing flowers in the spring and summer and clearing snow in the winter. Aaron would often go with her, standing quietly while she talked to her first husband, telling him about their children and the ranch and how happy she was. There was no jealousy in Aaron, no resentment of the love she still carried. He understood that her capacity to love Thomas did not diminish her love for him, that grief and joy could coexist in the same heart. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1886, Aaron took Rebecca back to Platteville for a rare night away from the children, who were being watched by Martha from the general store. They had dinner at the small hotel restaurant, a luxury they rarely indulged in, and afterward walked through the town, which had grown considerably since they had first met. Platteville was becoming a real town, with new businesses and homes, a schoolhouse and a proper church, and Rebecca felt a sense of pride that they had been part of this community's growth. "You ever regret it?" Aaron asked as they walked. "Tying yourself to me, taking on my baggage and my fears?" Rebecca stopped and turned to face him, her hand coming up to cup his bearded cheek. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Aaron, you are the best thing that ever happened to me besides our children. You taught me that the heart can heal, that love is not a finite resource, that it is possible to build something beautiful from broken pieces. I would choose you 1,000 times over in this life and any other." Aaron pulled her close, holding her tightly in the middle of the street, heedless of the people passing by. "I love you, Rebecca Whitmore," he said. "I loved you when you were lost in grief. I loved you when you were afraid to let me in. I love you now, strong and confident and more beautiful than ever, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They returned home the next day to chaos, as 3 children under the age of 6 inevitably created, but it was a joyful chaos, full of laughter and energy and life. Rebecca stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching Aaron swing Mary Sarah around while Thomas and James chased each other in circles, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was her life now, messy and loud and wonderful, built on the foundation of loss but reaching toward hope. As the years continued to pass, Rebecca and Aaron grew older together, their children growing up strong and capable. Thomas, their eldest, showed an aptitude for ranching that made Aaron beam with pride, while Mary Sarah had her mother's head for numbers and business. James was the wild one, always getting into mischief, always pushing boundaries, but with a good heart that shone through in everything he did. They hired tutors to educate the children, determined that they would have opportunities beyond the ranch, even as they taught them the value of hard work and connection to the land. In 1890, when Rebecca was 36 and Aaron was 42, they welcomed a 4th and final child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a surprise, coming so many years after James, but a welcome one, and she became the darling of the whole family, doted on by her older siblings and parents alike. Rebecca had worried that she might be too old for another pregnancy, but everything went smoothly, and Grace was born healthy and strong, with Aaron's gray-blue eyes and Rebecca's dark hair. The ranch continued to prosper, and by the mid-1890s, they owned one of the largest spreads in the area. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and changing markets, always adapting and persevering. Aaron's mountain skills and Rebecca's business acumen made them nearly unbeatable, and they had earned the respect of the entire community. They employed more than a dozen men, many of whom had been with them for years, treated fairly and paid well, and the ranch operated like a well-oiled machine. On a warm evening in June 1895, as they sat on the porch of their now substantial ranch house watching the sun set over the mountains, Rebecca reached over and took Aaron's hand. They were both showing their age now, lines etched deep around their eyes and mouths, gray threading through their hair, but their love had only deepened with time, becoming something unshakable and eternal. "You remember that first morning?" Rebecca asked. "When you showed up at my door offering to help," Aaron chuckled, the sound deep and warm. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even with grief written all over your face. I remember wanting to take away your pain but not knowing how. I remember being terrified that you would send me away and I would lose my chance at something I did not even know I was looking for. I am so glad you came," Rebecca said softly. "I am so glad you stayed. You gave me back my life, Aaron. You taught me that it was possible to love again, that my heart was not broken beyond repair. You whispered that you would hurt with me, and you did, but you also showed me how to heal. You are the best man I have ever known." Aaron brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "We healed each other," he said. That is what love does, the real kind that lasts. It does not erase the past or pretend that pain does not exist. It just makes it bearable. It gives you a reason to keep going when everything feels impossible. You are my reason, Rebecca. You and our children and this life we have built together. Every morning I wake up next to you. I am grateful beyond words. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, Thomas and Mary Sarah arguing about something, James laughing, little Grace singing a tuneless song. It was the sound of family, of home, of a future that had seemed impossible on that cold morning 17 years ago, when a mountain man had knocked on a grieving widow's door. Rebecca thought about Thomas sometimes, her first husband, and she hoped he could see her now, see how she had honored his memory by living fully, by loving again, by building something lasting and good. She thought he would be proud of her, proud of the ranch and the family and the life she had created. She would always carry him in her heart, always remember the love they had shared, but she had learned that love does not end when someone dies. It transforms, becomes part of the foundation on which new love is built. As the years moved into the new century, Rebecca and Aaron aged gracefully, handing over more and more of the ranch operations to Thomas, who had grown into a capable and thoughtful young man. Mary Sarah married a schoolteacher from Denver and moved to the city, though she visited often with her own growing family. James, true to his wild nature, became a cavalry scout, sending letters from distant outposts that they treasured. Grace, their baby, showed signs of becoming a talented artist, filling sketchbooks with drawings of the ranch and the mountains and her family. Rebecca and Aaron became grandparents multiple times over, their home filling regularly with children and grandchildren, noise and laughter and love. They took up residence in a smaller house they built on the property, leaving the main house to Thomas and his wife and their children, content to step back and enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They spent their days working in the garden, riding through the ranch lands, and sitting on their porch watching the seasons change over the mountains they both loved. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1906, their entire family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled every room of both houses, and the noise was tremendous and wonderful. Rebecca, now 52 and still beautiful, her dark hair shot through with silver, stood in the middle of it all and felt her heart swell with gratitude. Aaron, at 58 with a completely gray beard but still strong and vital, came up beside her and wrapped an arm around her waist. "Look at what we built," he said softly in her ear. "Look at all this love and life." It started with two broken people who were brave enough to try again, and look what came from it. Rebecca turned in his arms, looking up at this man who had been her partner, her love, her rock for 3 decades. "You told me once that you would hurt with me," she said. "And you did. But you also showed me how to heal, how to live, how to love without fear. You kept every promise you ever made to me, Aaron Whitmore, and I am the luckiest woman who ever lived to have found you." They kissed, long and sweet, heedless of their family watching and cheering around them. When they pulled apart, Aaron rested his forehead against hers. "I loved you from the beginning," he whispered, "and I will love you past the ending, whatever that may be." The party continued long into the night, full of food and music and stories, and when everyone finally settled down to sleep, Rebecca and Aaron walked back to their small house under a sky full of stars. They sat on their porch for a while, holding hands and listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the cattle lowing softly in the distance, the wind rustling through the grass. "I could not have imagined this," Rebecca said finally. That cold morning when you showed up at my door, I could not have imagined any of this. I thought my life was over. I thought love was done for me. I was so lost in my grief that I could not see any possibility of healing. I know, Aaron said. I felt the same way. I had spent 5 years running from my pain, hiding in the mountains, convinced that I was better off alone. But you changed everything. You reminded me what it means to be human, to care about someone beyond yourself, to take the risk of loving even when you know it might lead to pain. Was it worth it? Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. The risk, the fear, all of it. Aaron turned to look at her, his gray-blue eyes reflecting the starlight, and smiled. Every moment, he said. Every single moment was worth it. If I had to go through everything again, all the loss and pain and fear, I would do it gladly if it meant finding you at the end. They sat together in perfect contentment, two people who had found each other in the darkest moments of their lives and built something beautiful and lasting. The Wild West around them was changing, becoming tamer and more civilized, but this ranch, this family, this love would endure, a testament to the power of healing and hope and the courage to try again. As they finally rose to go inside, Aaron paused at the door and pulled Rebecca close one more time. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Rebecca asked. "For letting me hurt with you," Aaron said. "For being brave enough to love again. For giving me this life, this family, this everything." "You are my everything, Rebecca. You always have been." Rebecca kissed him softly, tasting tears, though whether they were his or hers she could not say. "And you are mine," she whispered, "now and always." They went inside together, closing the door on the night, and in the morning would wake to another day of the beautiful life they had built, surrounded by love and family and the land that had brought them together. The widow who thought she could never love again had found her mountain man, and together they had created something that would last for generations. A legacy of courage and healing and enduring love that began with a simple offer to hurt together and grew into something magnificent and eternal.